Willow Nash pressed her back against the rough wall of her stepbrother's cabin as he counted the whiskey bottles on the table, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. At 19, she never imagined her life would be bartered away like cattle at the market. Yet here she stood, watching her stepbrother arrange the terms of her fate with a stranger. "She's a hard worker," her stepbrother Elias drawled, the stink of cheap whiskey already seeping from his pores though it was barely past noon. "Good with a needle, decent cook, worth every drop of that there whiskey." The year was 1876, and in the harsh Nebraska territory, Willow had learned that a woman alone had few choices and fewer protections. Since her mother's death 3 months prior, Elias had made life unbearable. His gambling debts mounted daily, and now he'd found a way to settle them by selling her to the aging owner of the local saloon, a man known for his cruelty toward the women who worked for him. "Please, Elias," Willow whispered, her blue eyes filling with tears. "Mother would never have wanted this." Elias sneered. "Your ma ain't here no more, is she? And that means I decide what happens to you. Old man Jenkins here offered 10 bottles of his finest for you, and I'm taking it." Jenkins, a balding man with yellowed teeth and fingers stained brown from tobacco, grinned as his gaze traveled over Willow's slender frame. "She'll earn her keep quick enough at the Red Garter." A crash from outside startled them all, the sound of a wagon pulling up, followed by boot steps on the porch. The door swung open without a knock, and a tall figure filled the doorway, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. "Pardon the interruption," came a deep voice, its tone mild yet somehow commanding. "I'm looking for Elias Nash. Got a delivery from the general store." Willow blinked as the stranger stepped inside, revealing himself to be a young man perhaps 3 or 4 years older than herself. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm, he wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, dusty denims, a faded blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat he now held respectfully in his hands. "That's me," Elias grumbled. "What delivery?" "I didn't order nothing." The cowboy's eyes flicked from Elias to Jenkins, lingering briefly on the whiskey bottles arranged between them. Then his gaze found Willow, noting her trembling hands and tear-streaked face. Something in his expression shifted. "Must have been a mistake," he said smoothly. "Though while I'm here, I couldn't help overhearing your conversation. I'm looking to hire help at my ranch south of town. Need someone who can cook and keep house while I'm working the cattle." Jenkins stepped forward, his face reddening. "Now see here, young man, we're conducting business." "Indeed," the cowboy replied, his voice remaining even. "And I'm offering business of my own. What are you paying for the lady's services, if I might ask?" 10 bottles of prime whiskey," Elias boasted, clearly pleased with himself. The cowboy reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather pouch. "I'll give you $15 cash, more than enough to buy twice that amount of whiskey." Willow watched in stunned silence as Elias's eyes lit up with greed. Cash money was harder to come by than whiskey in these parts, and $15 was no small sum. "Deal," Elias said quickly before Jenkins could protest. "Take her and go." The cowboy turned to Willow, his expression softening. "Madam, if you'd like to gather your belongings, my wagon's outside. The offer's genuine fair pay for honest work, but it's your choice." Something in his eyes told Willow he understood exactly what kind of work Jenkins had been planning for her. With shaking hands, she gathered the few treasured possessions her stepbrother hadn't yet sold: her mother's Bible, a small wooden box containing a cameo brooch, and a bundle of clothing. Within minutes, she found herself climbing onto the seat of a wagon beside the stranger who had just purchased her freedom. As they pulled away from the cabin, the cowboy finally introduced himself. "Yates Walker," he said simply, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I've got a small spread about 10 miles south. It's not much, but it's honest work I'm offering." Willow clutched her bundle tightly. "Why did you help me?" Yates was silent for a long moment. No decent man could stand by and watch what was happening in there. "I've seen what becomes of women sold to men like Jenkins." "Thank you," Willow whispered, the full weight of what she'd narrowly escaped beginning to sink in. "Don't thank me yet," Yates replied with a small smile. "Ranch life isn't easy, especially this far from town. But I promise you'll be treated with respect." As the wagon rolled southward through the golden prairie grasses, Willow stole glances at her rescuer. His profile was strong, with a straight nose and a jaw dusted with stubble. His hands, holding the reins, were calloused from hard work, but they looked like capable, gentle hands. For the first time in months, Willow felt something unfamiliar flutter in her chest, not fear or dread, but something that might have been hope. The Walker Ranch was indeed small, as Yates had warned, a modest 2-room cabin with a separate barn and corral. A few cattle grazed in the distance, and a vegetable garden grew alongside the house. It wasn't much, but to Willow's eyes, it looked like paradise compared to what might have been her fate. "It's just me here," Yates explained as he helped her down from the wagon. "Been trying to make a go of it since my father passed last year. Left me the land and a small herd, but it's hard to manage alone." Willow nodded, understanding the unspoken message. He truly did need help, which meant her presence served a purpose beyond charity. "I can cook, clean, mend clothing, tend a garden," she said quickly. "I'm stronger than I look." Yates smiled, a genuine smile that reached his storm-gray eyes. "I don't doubt that for a moment, Miss Nash." The cabin was sparsely furnished but clean. Yates showed her to the smaller of the 2 rooms, which contained a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table. "This will be your room," he said. "I'll sleep in the main room. You'll have your privacy." Relief washed over Willow. Though Yates had given her no reason to fear him, the experience with her stepbrother and Jenkins had left her wary of men's intentions. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." That evening, Willow cooked a simple meal from the supplies in Yates's pantry. They ate together at his small table, the conversation awkward at first but gradually easing as Yates told her about the ranch and his hopes for expanding the herd. "My father always said this land could support twice the cattle we have now," he explained. "Just need to dig another well on the north section, build up the herd slowly." Willow listened, admiring his quiet determination. "How long have you been here?" "All my life," Yates replied. "Father claimed this land when I was just a baby. My mother died of fever when I was 12. It's been just me since Father passed." "I'm sorry," Willow said. "My mother died 3 months ago. Consumption. My real father died in the war when I was small. Mother remarried Elias 5 years ago." "He was different when she was alive." Yates nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Grief changes some people, makes them harder." "Not you," Willow observed quietly. "Some days it tries," he admitted. "But my father taught me that life keeps moving forward with or without our permission. We can either move with it or get left behind." As darkness fell, Yates lit a lamp and showed Willow where everything was kept in the small cabin. Before retiring to his bedroll in the main room, he paused at her door. "Miss Nash, I want you to know something. That door has a lock on the inside. Use it if it makes you feel safer. And if at any point you wish to leave, if this arrangement doesn't suit you, I'll take you to town, not back to your stepbrother. You have my word." Willow nodded, touched by his thoughtfulness. After he'd gone, she did lock the door, but not out of fear of Yates. Rather, it was the first time in months she'd had the luxury of true privacy, and she savored it as she prepared for bed. The days fell into a rhythm as spring deepened into summer. Willow tended the house and garden while Yates worked with the cattle. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation that grew increasingly comfortable. Willow learned that beneath Yates's quiet exterior was a man of intelligence and surprising humor. He'd educated himself from books his father had collected, and sometimes in the evenings, he would read aloud from volumes of poetry or adventure tales. For his part, Yates found himself looking forward to returning to the cabin each evening. Willow had transformed the simple structure into something that felt like a home. Fresh-cut wildflowers appeared on the table, curtains fashioned from spare fabric hung in the windows, and the scent of home-cooked meals welcomed him at the end of long days. More than the physical changes, though, was the shift in the atmosphere. The loneliness that had pervaded the place since his father's death had lifted. Willow's presence, her quiet laugh, her soft voice, the sound of her humming as she worked filled spaces he hadn't realized were empty. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the prairie sky in shades of orange and purple, Yates found himself speaking thoughts he hadn't intended to voice. "I never thanked my father enough for teaching me to recognize a good thing when I see it," he said quietly. Willow glanced at him, a question in her blue eyes. "The day I found you," Yates continued, "I wasn't making a delivery. I was in town picking up supplies when I overheard Jenkins boasting to the bartender about a deal he was making with Nash. Said he was getting a pretty young thing for his establishment in exchange for whiskey." Willow's hand stilled in her lap. "You came looking for me?" Yates nodded. "I knew what kind of man Jenkins is. Couldn't stand the thought of anyone being sold to him, especially not for something as worthless as whiskey." "So you rescued me," Willow said softly, "like some knight from a storybook." Yates shook his head. "No knight, just a man who couldn't walk away." "Either way," Willow replied, "you saved me from a terrible fate. I'm grateful every day." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing steadily over the weeks. But neither was ready to speak of it yet, and the moment passed as the last light faded from the sky. The next morning, Yates announced he needed to ride into town for supplies. "Would you like to come along?" he asked. "It's a fair distance, but the wagon's comfortable enough." Willow hesitated. She hadn't left the ranch since arriving, and the thought of potentially encountering her stepbrother made her stomach knot with anxiety, but she couldn't hide forever. "Yes," she decided, "I'd like that." The journey took most of the morning. As they approached the small settlement, Willow's tension was visible in the rigid set of her shoulders. Yates noticed and guided the horses to a stop just outside town. "We don't have to go in," he said gently. "I can leave you at the Wilsons' farm just back there. Martha Wilson is a kind woman. She'd welcome the company while I get what we need." Willow squared her shoulders. "No, I won't hide. Besides, I've saved the egg money you've been giving me. I'd like to purchase some fabric if the general store has any." Yates nodded, admiration in his eyes. "Very well, but stay close to me." The town was bustling with its usual mix of farmers, ranchers, and travelers passing through. Willow kept her head high as they walked from the wagon to the general store, though her eyes darted nervously, scanning for Elias. Inside the store, Yates went about purchasing what they needed: flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition for his rifle. Willow found a bolt of pretty blue calico that would make a new dress and some white cotton for undergarments. As Yates paid for their goods, the storekeeper's wife leaned across the counter. "You must be Miss Nash," the older woman said warmly. "I've heard about you. It's good to see Yates with some help out at that ranch. Too much for one person, I always said." Willow smiled politely, wondering what exactly the woman had heard about her. As if reading her thoughts, the storekeeper's wife patted her hand. "Don't you worry, dear. Everyone knows what that stepbrother of yours tried to do. Shameful business. But you landed on your feet with Yates Walker. Good man, from good people." Their business concluded, they were heading back to the wagon when a familiar voice called out, slurring slightly even though it was barely past noon. "Well, if it ain't my dear sister." Willow froze as Elias stumbled toward them from the direction of the saloon. Yates immediately stepped slightly in front of her, a protective gesture that wasn't lost on Elias. "Got yourself a new protector, eh, Willow?" Elias sneered. "Heard you're playing house with Walker. How much is he paying you for your services?" Yates's voice was dangerously quiet when he spoke. "Mr. Nash, I suggest you move along." Elias laughed. "Oh, protective, ain't he? Tell me, Walker, was she worth the $15? Because Jenkins says he'd still pay good whiskey for her if you're tired of—" He never finished the sentence. Yates's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling into the dirt. Several onlookers gasped, but no one moved to help Elias. "Miss Nash works for me as a housekeeper," Yates said, his voice carrying to the small crowd that had gathered. "Anyone suggesting otherwise is insulting a respectable woman and will answer to me." Elias scrambled to his feet, his hand on his jaw. For a moment, it seemed he might retaliate, but something in Yates's stance, or perhaps the fact that several townsmen were watching with expressions that suggested they sided with the cowboy, made him think better of it. "Keep her then," he spat. "Ungrateful girl wasn't worth the trouble anyway." As Elias slunk back toward the saloon, Willow stood trembling, her face flushed with humiliation. Yates gently took her elbow. "Let's go home," he said quietly. The ride back to the ranch was silent, Willow struggling to contain her emotions and Yates respecting her need for quiet. Only when the familiar outline of the cabin came into view did she finally speak. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Yates looked at her in surprise. "For what?" "For bringing trouble to you, for making you fight my battles." Yates brought the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin. "Willow, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, surprised by his use of her given name for the first time. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said firmly. "Nothing. What happened today is exactly why I couldn't leave you with that man or with Jenkins. You deserve better." "And you?" she asked softly. "What do you deserve?" Something shifted in Yates's expression, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "I don't know," he admitted, "but having you here these past months, it's been more than I ever thought to hope for." The confession hung between them, opening a door neither had been brave enough to approach until now. "Yates," Willow began, but the words caught in her throat. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that I care for you as more than an employee, but I understand if you don't feel the same or if it's too soon after everything you've been through." Willow caught his hand before he could withdraw it. "It's not too soon," she whispered. "I care for you too." The kiss that followed was gentle, tentative, a question as much as an answer. When they finally parted, both were smiling, a new understanding between them. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, Yates spoke of the future in a way he never had before. "I've been saving to expand the herd," he said. "With a few more cattle and another good season, we could build a bigger cabin, maybe add a proper parlor, another bedroom or two." Willow's heart quickened at the implication. "That sounds wonderful." "It would be," Yates agreed, taking her hand. "If you were willing to stay, not as my housekeeper but as my wife." Willow's eyes widened. "Yates, are you asking?" "I am," he said, suddenly looking nervous. "I know it hasn't been long and maybe I'm rushing things, but I love you, Willow Nash." I think I started falling for you that first day when you climbed into my wagon with nothing but a bundle of clothes and still held your head high." Tears filled Willow's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "And yes, I'll marry you." Their wedding took place that September, a simple ceremony performed by the circuit preacher who visited the area monthly. The entire community turned out the storekeeper and his wife, neighboring ranchers and farmers, even the schoolteacher from town. Conspicuously absent was Elias Nash, who had reportedly left the territory after losing his cabin in a poker game. Martha Wilson and the other women had helped Willow prepare a wedding feast, and the celebration lasted well into the evening, with fiddle music and dancing in the yard beside the cabin. As the sun began to set, Yates pulled Willow away from the festivities for a moment of privacy. "I have something for you," he said, pressing a small package into her hands. Inside was a delicate silver ring set with a small pearl. "It was my mother's," Yates explained. "Father gave it to me before he passed, said I should save it for when I found someone special." Willow's eyes filled with tears as he slipped it onto her finger. "It's beautiful." "There's one more thing," Yates said, taking her hand and leading her toward the barn. Inside, tied to a post, was a pretty bay mare with a white blaze on her forehead. "She's yours," Yates said. Every rancher's wife should have her own horse. Willow stroked the mare's velvety nose, overwhelmed by the gesture. "What's her name? That's for you to decide." Willow thought for a moment. "Freedom," she said softly. "I'll call her Freedom." Yates smiled, understanding the significance. "Perfect." As autumn gave way to winter, the newlyweds settled into married life with a happiness neither had dared to imagine possible. The cabin, small as it was, became a true home filled with love and laughter. On cold evenings, they would sit before the fire, planning for the future, the expanded herd, the larger cabin, the children they hoped to have. When spring arrived, bringing new calves to the herd and fresh growth to the prairie, it also brought news that filled their hearts with joy. Willow was expecting their first child. A son or daughter, Yates marveled, his hand gently resting on Willow's still flat stomach. Either way, a blessing. "A family of our own," Willow agreed, covering his hand with hers. "Something I never thought I'd have after Mother died." The months passed in a blur of preparation. Yates added a nursery to their cabin, working tirelessly in the evenings after his ranch duties were done. Willow sewed tiny garments and quilts, her heart swelling with anticipation. Their daughter arrived on a crisp October morning, a healthy, strong, lunged baby with Yates's dark hair and Willow's blue eyes. They named her Hope, for what she represented to both of them. As Willow nursed the infant before the fire that evening, Yates sat beside them, his expression one of wonder and contentment. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked quietly. "The day we met," Willow nodded. "Often. How different everything might have been if you hadn't come through that door." "I was so angry when I heard what Nash was planning," Yates admitted. "Rode out there ready for a fight. But then I saw you, standing there so brave despite everything, and I knew I had to be smarter about it." "You offered the one thing he couldn't resist," Willow said. "Money for more whiskey." "Best $15 I ever spent," Yates said, smiling as he stroked his daughter's tiny head. "Bought me a whole future I never knew I wanted." 3 years later, Hope was joined by a brother, Daniel, a sturdy boy with his father's quiet determination. By then, the Walker Ranch had grown substantially. The expanded herd brought prosperity, allowing Yates to build the larger cabin he'd promised. With 4 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a parlor with bookshelves filled with volumes for the children's education, it was everything they'd dreamed of. On the 5th anniversary of the day they met, Yates surprised Willow with a special gift, the deed to her stepbrother's former cabin and land, which had passed through several owners before coming up for sale. "What will we do with it?" Willow asked, bewildered. "Whatever you want," Yates replied. "Sell it, rent it out, turn it into kindling. It's yours to decide." Willow thought for a long moment. "Let's donate it to the church," she finally said. "They've been wanting to start a home for orphan children." A place that was once filled with cruelty could become a sanctuary for those who need love and protection. Yates pulled her into his arms. "That's why I love you," he murmured against her hair. "You've got a heart that always finds the good, even in painful memories." As the years passed, the Walker family continued to grow and prosper. Hope and Daniel were joined by twin sisters, Emma and Elizabeth, completing their family. The ranch expanded until it was one of the most successful in the territory, known for its quality cattle and the fair dealing of its owner. The old Nash cabin, transformed into Haven House, became a home for dozens of children over the years. Willow visited regularly, bringing food, clothing, and most importantly, understanding for the young ones who, like her once, needed someone to show them that their past didn't define their future. On warm summer evenings, Yates and Willow would often sit on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over the prairie they both loved. Sometimes, Willow would think about how close she'd come to a life of degradation and despair, how one moment of courage from a stranger had altered her entire destiny. "What are you thinking about?" Yates would ask, noticing her contemplative expression. And Willow would smile, taking his hand, the same hand that had led her to freedom all those years ago. "Just how lucky I am that you happened to make a delivery that day." "Not luck," Yates would reply, kissing her softly. "Providence." And as their children gathered around them, clamoring for stories of the old days and how their parents met, Willow would think that perhaps he was right. For in this vast, sometimes cruel frontier, two souls had found each other against impossible odds, creating a legacy of love that would endure long after the Wild West had been tamed.